Hi there, movie lovers. If Iron Man 2 has been on your mind, you've come to the right place. Released on May 7, 2010, this film is packed with surprises, and today, we're going to break it all down for you. If you're excited to explore more, be sure to like this video. It's a small click that means the world to us. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss out on any of our deep dives into your favorite movies. Let's get started. Iron Man 2 hit theaters on May 7, 2010, marking a pivotal moment for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The world had already been introduced to Tony Stark in the 2008 Iron Man, but this sequel brought a fresh wave of energy, expanding the story and introducing new characters while diving deeper into the complexities of the man behind the armor. For those who loved the first film, this one promised even more thrills, but with a deeper emotional core that made Tony Stark more than just a rich genius with a cool suit. This time around, Tony's life was changing in ways he couldn't ignore. The movie wastes no time diving into the stakes. Right off the bat, we see Tony Stark in full control of the Iron Man suit, flying through the skies, giving the world a flashy display of his newfound fame. He's no longer hiding who he is. He's the hero the world knows him to be, and that's where the trouble starts. Fame, fortune, and the power of being Iron Man have opened doors, but they've also led to new enemies and complications. And as the film unfolds, it becomes clear that Tony's bravado and confidence, which once made him invincible in the first film, are now the very things that threaten to bring him down. The plot kicks off with Tony reveling in his role as a public figure. But there's a catch: his body is deteriorating. The palladium core in his chest, which keeps him alive, is poisoning him. He's racing against time, struggling with a problem no tech can solve, all while trying to maintain control over his company, Stark Industries, and the armor that has made him a global icon. The movie doesn't shy away from this vulnerability, making Tony Stark's fight against time one of the most relatable and human parts of the entire story. For all his genius, for all his suits and gadgets, he's just a man who's starting to realize his time might be running out. But it's not just Tony's physical decline that drives the plot. The film introduces Ivan Vanko, a Russian inventor with a personal vendetta. He doesn't just want to take down Tony Stark. He's out to prove that the legacy of Stark technology is built on theft and deceit. Vanko's own version of the Iron Man suit is just as dangerous, and his battle with Tony isn't only about technology. It's about revenge, legacy, and who has the real claim to greatness. Their rivalry kicks off in the most memorable way, with a show-stopping sequence at the Monaco Grand Prix, where Vanko makes his dramatic entrance, turning the race into a battleground and forcing Tony to suit up in public once again. The way this scene plays out, with Tony going head-to-head against an unknown threat in front of the entire world, is a perfect setup for what's to come. You can't help but be hooked from the start. As the movie progresses, Tony begins to realize that being Iron Man isn't just about being the strongest guy in the room. It's about taking responsibility for the chaos he's caused. The theme of legacy runs through the entire film, as Tony tries to figure out what kind of legacy he's leaving behind. He's faced with the shadow of his father, Howard Stark, a man who was both a genius and a mystery. The film explores Tony's complicated relationship with his father's legacy, showing how this ties into his current struggles. Howard's journals and his involvement in the creation of the Iron Man technology add a layer of intrigue, hinting that there's so much more to Tony's family than what is ever understood. There's a sense that Tony is trying to make sense of the father who never gave him the answers he wanted, and that drives him towards some surprising decisions. But the plot doesn't let Tony stew in his own issues for too long. Enter James "Rhodey" Rhodes, who has his own stake in the story. Rhodey, once Tony's best friend, starts to see that Tony's behavior is getting out of hand. After a confrontation between the two, Rhodey steals one of Tony's suits, using it to create his own version of the Iron Man armor, War Machine. This twist adds a layer of personal conflict and stakes, as Tony's closest friend becomes a weapon against him. The scene where Rhodey and Tony clash in a full-on battle is one of the film's most intense moments, and the shift in their relationship leaves you wondering where things are headed next. There's also Natasha Romanoff, introduced as the mysterious agent from SALD. She initially comes across as just another agent in the mix, but as the film unfolds, you begin to realize she has her own hidden agenda. Her true purpose becomes clear later on in the movie, and the revelation that she's not just a simple agent, but Black Widow, adds another unexpected layer to the story. The fact that she's a skilled spy, keeping her true nature hidden, works as a perfect counterbalance to Tony's openness and self-assurance. She's a character who operates in the shadows, while Tony can't help but live in the spotlight. And as the movie inches toward its finale, It builds to a showdown where Tony must face not just Vanko and his own limitations, but also the consequences of his past actions. By the time the final battle arrives, there's more at stake than just who wins or loses. Tony has to come to terms with the fact that he can't do everything alone. He needs help from his friends, and he needs to make amends for his reckless decisions. That's what makes the ending so powerful. It's not just about saving the day, it's about Tony realizing that being a hero doesn't mean doing it all yourself. Sometimes, you need the people who care about you to help you pick up the pieces. Throughout all the twists, turns, and action-packed sequences, Iron Man 2 doesn't just deliver big spectacle. It gives us a deeper look into Tony Stark's psyche and forces him to confront his own vulnerabilities. It's a story about growth, responsibility, and what it means to be a hero in a world that expects perfection. And even though the movie is filled with spectacular fight scenes and a plot full of high-stakes action, it's those quieter moments, the ones where Tony grapples with his legacy, his health, and his relationships, that stick with you the most. From start to finish, Iron Man 2 keeps you on the edge of your seat, balancing big action with deeper, more personal moments. The surprises come thick and fast, from unexpected alliances to jaw-dropping reveals, making it a must-watch for anyone who wants to see Tony Stark face his toughest challenge yet, not just on the battlefield, but within himself. The movie might be packed with high-octane moments, but it's the deeper themes of mortality, legacy, and redemption that give it lasting power. Tony Stark isn't just battling an enemy, he's battling his own fears about who he is and what he's becoming. And that's what makes Iron Man 2 so compelling, the blend of heart and heroism, the personal and the spectacular, all wrapped into one unforgettable ride. The city was alive with the pulse of excitement, the kind of hum that comes with an icon's arrival. Tony Stark, the man who had taken the world by storm, was now the face of Iron Man, a public hero, and an undeniable presence. The world had seen him step into the spotlight, revealing the armor, the tech, and the genius behind it all. But now, it wasn't just the bright lights of fame that followed him. There was a shadow looming over Tony Stark, something far more personal. Inside his chest, the very thing that had saved him, the arc reactor, was also killing him. The palladium core he had created to keep him alive was slowly poisoning him, and Tony Stark was running out of time. At the beginning of the story, Tony Stark is living in the aftermath of his public revelation as Iron Man. The press is relentless, hailing him as the hero the world needed, but also pressing him for more answers, more tech, more of everything. In the grand halls of Stark Industries, Tony stands proud, but there's a noticeable shift in his demeanor. It's a confidence that borders on arrogance, but it's also the kind of bravado that comes from someone who knows they can't escape what's coming for them. He's facing a death sentence, but is not sure how to fight it. And that's where everything begins. In the midst of Tony's self-assuredness, his relationship with Pepper Potts has also shifted. The woman who had once been his assistant, his friend, is now at the helm of Stark Industries. She's trying to keep the company afloat, steering it through a sea of public scrutiny and Tony's reckless behavior. The tension between them is palpable, but it's a tension born out of concern. Pepper is worried about Tony, about the man who is constantly putting himself at risk. Tony, in return, is avoiding the reality of his situation. He acts like nothing's wrong, but Pepper knows better. Their conversations are filled with unspoken truths, moments where the walls Tony has built around himself crack just enough for the vulnerability to seep through. But even then, he brushes it off with a wink and a joke, never truly facing what's happening inside him. The movie sets up early on the idea that Tony has become too used to being in control. He's the man with the answers, the man who always has a plan. But when it comes to his health, there's no solution, no plan, and no way to fix what's broken. The palladium core is poisoning him, and as Tony tinkers with new tech, trying to find a way out, the realization starts to settle in, he's not invincible. But Tony being Tony, he doesn't take this quietly. Instead of slowing down, he throws himself further into the public eye, hosting extravagant parties and flaunting his success, trying to drown out the ticking clock inside his chest. It's at one of these lavish events that we are introduced to Ivan Vanko. A shadowy figure with a past tied to Tony's father, Vanko is a man with a score to settle. His introduction is subtle but powerful, his not a loud character, but his presence is chilling. Vanko's connection to the Stark family legacy isn't immediately clear, but it's evident that he has a deep-seated anger towards the Starks. The audience is left to wonder, what is his agenda? What drives him? As the film continues, the question of legacy, both Tony's and Vanko's, will grow more and more complicated. The first major event that sets the stage for everything to come is the Monaco Grand Prix. Tony, ever the showman, is invited to the event, flaunting his wealth and success as only he can. But this is no ordinary race. As Tony speeds through the course, showing off his skills in a way that only Tony Stark could, the ground beneath him begins to shift. Suddenly, Vanko makes his dramatic move, emerging from the shadows to reveal his own version of the Iron Man suit. With whips of electric energy that can tear through metal, Vanko takes the race by storm, turning it into an all-out battle between him and Tony. The spectacle of the fight is incredible, but it's more than just an action scene. It's the first real sign that Tony's life is spiraling out of his control. No longer is he just a man in a suit. He's facing someone who can match him, someone who's out to take everything he's built. As the fight escalates, Tony is forced to rely on his own instincts to survive. The once unflappable Tony Stark is now in a position where he's not the smartest person in the room, where his tech is being overpowered by someone who shares his own genius. It's a humbling moment for him, a crack in the armor he's spent years building around himself. He's always prided himself on being in control, but here, in the chaos of the Monaco Grand Prix, it becomes clear that control is slipping through his fingers. In the aftermath of the event, Tony's life begins to unravel in unexpected ways. As he tries to recover from the attack, he's confronted by the government, led by Senator Stern, who demands that Stark turn over the Iron Man suit. The government sees the suit as a weapon, something that belongs to the people, and they're not shy about pushing Tony to give it up. This marks the first real conflict with authority in the film, a shift from the first movie, where Tony was more of a rogue hero. Here, the stakes are higher. Tony's inventions are no longer just his own. They have become a symbol of power, something that others want to control. This is also where we see the growing tension between Tony and Rhodey, his close friend and military liaison. Rhodey, once loyal to Tony, starts to see things differently. His growing concern about Tony's reckless behavior, especially in the wake of the Monaco attack, culminates in a heated argument. When Rhodey steals one of Tony's Iron Man suits, turning it into the war machine, the stage is set for a battle between friends. Their confrontation serves as a turning point for both characters. Tony's realization that not everyone shares his vision, and Rhodey's understanding that sometimes, standing by your friend means standing up to them. But the personal conflicts aren't the only ones Tony faces. The film also introduces LD agent Natasha Romanoff, who is undercover at Stark Industries. At first, she seems like just another one of Nick Fury's agents, but her true purpose is far from obvious. She's a master of deception, a quiet player in a larger game, and her presence hints at the broader world Tony is now a part of. As the film progresses, Natasha's true role in the story becomes clear. She's not just a spy, she's a key figure in the larger narrative of the Marvel Universe, setting the stage for the Avengers' eventual coming together. But for now, she operates in the shadows, keeping her true identity hidden while moving Tony's story forward in subtle ways. The subtle foreshadowing of these twists builds steadily throughout the beginning of the film. Each interaction, each moment, hints at something more significant on the horizon. Vanko's quiet rage, the growing friction between Tony and Rhodey, and Natasha's mysterious nature, all these threads weave together to create a sense of unease. You know something's coming, but you don't quite know what. The stakes are rising, and Tony's world is becoming more complicated by the minute. Through these early events, the film masterfully sets the stage for everything that will unfold. The action is big, the stakes are high, and the characters are all facing their own battles. But underneath it all, there's a story about legacy, responsibility, and the consequences of living a life without limits. Tony Stark is no longer just a man in a suit. He's a man who has built something bigger than himself, and now, he must face the fallout from that creation. As the story unfolds, it becomes clear that Tony's greatest challenge won't just come from his enemies. It will come from the man in the mirror, the one he's been trying to outrun. The twists, the turns, and the battles that lie ahead will test him in ways he never expected. And through it all, one thing remains certain: nothing will ever be the same again. As the days wore on, the mounting pressure on Tony Stark grew unbearable, pushing him into a corner where his choices became increasingly desperate. The weight of his legacy, both the genius he had inherited and the toxic empire he had built, was now too much for him to handle. His time was running out. The Palladium core was poisoning him, and despite his brilliance, no technology could save him from the inevitable. This realization hung over him like a dark cloud, only further amplified by the constant threats from both new and old enemies. Tony's world had begun to unravel from all directions. First, Ivan Vanko, The vengeful genius whose obsession with the Stark legacy had fueled his desire to create an even deadlier version of the Iron Man suit, was making his moves. The man Tony had dismissed as a mere nuisance turned out to be a far greater threat, not only because of his technical prowess but also due to the deep-seated pain that drove him. Vanko wasn't just trying to build his own suit to rival Tony's. He was trying to tear down everything Tony had ever stood for. The tech, the suit, the fame, everything Tony held dear was at risk, and the stakes were growing higher with each passing moment. The pivotal moment of reckoning arrived when Tony, in an attempt to fix his own dying body, turned to the one thing he had avoided for so long, the past. The secret journals of his father, Howard Stark, had been left behind as a kind of inheritance, a final message to his son. Inside those pages, Tony discovered the missing piece of the puzzle, a new element, one that would power the arc reactor and possibly save his life. But this wasn't just about saving himself. This discovery carried with it the weight of understanding the kind of man Howard Stark had been, both a visionary and a man who left far too many unanswered questions for Tony to resolve. It was a moment of clarity for Tony, a quiet, painful acknowledgement that in the grand scheme of things, he had always been searching for something more than just tech, more than just control. He had been searching for understanding, for closure with a father who had never given him the answers he had so desperately needed. As Tony poured his energy into building the new element, desperation began to consume him. His health was deteriorating by the hour, and with the government breathing down his neck, demanding the Iron Man technology, it felt as if there were nowhere left to run. It was in the midst of this overwhelming pressure that Rhodey, his best friend, took matters into his own hands. Rhodey, who had long been Tony's closest ally, now found himself unable to stand by and watch as Tony spiraled further into self-destruction. He took the Iron Man armor and used it for himself, transforming into War Machine, a force to be reckoned with, built to match Tony's power. Their ensuing confrontation was one of the most intense moments in the film, a battle not just of technology but of friendship, of trust, and of what it means to stand up for someone you care about, even when they're too far gone to see it. The fight between Tony and Rhodey, while external, was a mirror for the internal struggle Tony was facing. On one hand, he was fighting for control of his own life, desperate to keep his genius intact, to keep his empire alive. On the other hand, he was being forced to confront the fact that the people he had pushed away, Pepper, Rhodey, even Nick Fury, were trying to protect him, even from himself. The emotional complexity of this battle wasn't lost on Tony. Deep down, he knew this was a turning point. He couldn't keep doing everything on his own. His stubbornness, his pride, had pushed everyone away, and now, standing face to face with Rhodey in the middle of an all-out fight, he had to reckon with the consequences of that isolation. But even with all the chaos unfolding around him, Tony's true enemy was still Ivan Vanko. The Russian inventor, who had once been seen as a mere antagonist, was now on a direct path to destroying everything Tony had built. Armed with his own version of the Iron Man suit, Vanko had made it clear that he was no longer just an inventor. He was a force in his own right, a man with nothing left to lose, who had the power to tear apart Stark Industries and everything Tony had fought for. It was in this moment, with his back against the wall and with the world on the verge of collapse, that Tony's greatest revelation hit him. He wasn't just fighting for survival, he was fighting for the people who mattered. And in that realization, Tony Stark understood what it truly meant to be Iron Man. The final act of Iron Man 2 unfolded with a kind of intensity that only a story this personal could generate. As Vanko unleashed chaos on the world, Tony's health continued to deteriorate, his mind clouded by both the poison inside his body and the weight of his past mistakes. But despite everything, Tony took action. The new element he had created powered the new arc reactor, allowing him to stabilize his health just in time for the final confrontation. The moment when Tony suited up, fully aware of the risks, was as much about the tech as it was about reclaiming his sense of purpose. This was no longer just a battle for survival, it was a battle to prove to himself. The battle that followed was a clash of giants, with Iron Man and War Machine fighting side by side against Vanko's army of drones. The action was thrilling, but it was the emotional stakes that made the fight truly compelling. Tony was no longer just the man who created Iron Man. He was the man who had learned to trust again, to work with the people who cared about him, and to finally accept that he couldn't solve everything on his own. The final confrontation wasn't just about defeating Vanko, it was about Tony Stark coming full circle, accepting his flaws, and embracing the responsibility that came with the power he had so recklessly wielded for years. When the dust finally settled, the resolution was as satisfying as it was bittersweet. Vanko was defeated, but the cost was clear. Tony had faced the truth about who he was and what it meant to be Iron Man. He had confronted his father's legacy, solved the problem of his own mortality, and restored balance to his life. But the real victory wasn't in the defeat of his enemies. It was in the reconciliation with those around him. Pepper, who had always been his moral compass, stood by his side, finally understanding the depth of Tony's struggle. Rhodey, once his rival, was now an ally, a friend who had stood by him even when Tony had pushed him away. The final moments of the film were as much about closure as they were about opening doors for the future. Tony, having faced his demons, took a bold step forward, one that would set the stage for the rest of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. His journey was far from over, but for the first time, he seemed to understand that being a hero was about more than just having the best tech or the coolest suit. It was about embracing the people around you, being vulnerable enough to let them in, and accepting that, sometimes, the greatest challenges weren't the ones you could fight with your fists. In the end, Iron Man 2 wasn't just about technology or battles. It was about Tony Stark's personal growth, his acceptance of his limitations, and his realization that even the most brilliant minds need help. The plot, filled with twists and intense moments, ultimately tied together as a story of redemption and understanding. Tony Stark, once the arrogant, self-assured genius, became a man who understood that power wasn't about control, it was about responsibility, and the strength to admit when you needed help. And with that, the story of Iron Man evolved, not just as a hero on the battlefield, but as a man who had learned to fight for something far greater than himself. Tony Stark stands at the center of Iron Man 2, his personality and motivations more complex than ever. After the world discovers he is Iron Man, Tony is thrown into a spiral of internal and external conflict. He's the same brilliant, cocky billionaire from the first film, but there's a new weight on his shoulders. His body is failing him, the palladium in his chest is slowly poisoning him, and his arc reactor, which powers the Iron Man suit, is also the thing keeping him alive. The very thing that made him a genius, a hero, and a symbol of hope is now his ticking clock. His usual deflection of personal issues with sarcasm and bravado is less effective this time around. He's not just dealing with enemies outside, he's fighting a battle inside his own body, too. This makes him more vulnerable, even as he tries to maintain control over everything around him. Despite his bravado, Tony's need for validation is clear. He wants to prove that Iron Man is more than just a weapon, but his stubbornness, his refusal to hand over the suit, comes off less as confidence and more as self-doubt. He constantly tests the limits of his own strength and intelligence, often to the detriment of his relationships. His refusal to accept help from people like Pepper or Rhodey shows how isolated he's become. But at the same time, Tony's journey in Iron Man 2 is about self-realization. As much as he pushes people away, he eventually has to face that he can't do everything on his own. The struggle between his need for independence and the reality of his situation makes Tony's character arc feel real and relatable. Robert Downey Jr. brings this version of Tony Stark to life in a way that makes every moment of vulnerability feel earned, never forced. He plays the contradictions in Stark's character masterfully. The moments where Tony is on the edge, letting go of his defenses, feel like a release, and it's Downey's ability to shift between charming arrogance and raw desperation that makes Tony so compelling. Even in the most intense moments, he never loses his sharp humor, using it to cover up deeper fears. The character is both larger than life and deeply human, and Downey's performance strikes that balance perfectly. Opposite Tony stands Ivan Vanko, the film's antagonist, whose motivations are rooted in a desire for revenge. Vanko is not just a villain for the sake of being evil, his hate for Tony runs deeper. It's personal, and it's tied to the legacy of Tony's father. Vanko's father, who was once a brilliant inventor, was betrayed by Tony's father, Howard Stark. This betrayal leads Vanko to a singular, consuming goal, to destroy everything Tony Stark represents. His creation of the Whiplash suit, a deadly combination of technology and vengeance, is not just about taking down Tony, but also proving to the world that he, too, can match the genius of Stark. Mickey Rourke gives Vanko a haunting and deeply melancholic quality. His performance doesn't just scream villain. Instead, there's an unsettling sadness in his eyes, the sense that his choices, his need for revenge, have consumed him. He's a man who's been wronged, a man whose intelligence was overshadowed by someone else. Rourke doesn't play Vanko as a monster but as a man twisted by his past and his pain. This complexity makes him more compelling than the usual one-dimensional villain. The film suggests that Vanko's pain is not entirely unjustified, even though his actions are. James Rhodey Rhodes, portrayed by Don Cheadle, is Tony's closest friend, and his role in Iron Man 2 is a balancing act between loyalty and responsibility. Rhodey starts the film as a trusted ally, but the pressure mounts as he watches Tony spiral. Rhodey is also dealing with his own set of challenges. His friendship with Tony is tested by Tony's reckless behavior, and is pushed to a breaking point when he steals the War Machine suit to confront Tony. Rhodey's motivations are straightforward, yet deep. He wants to protect his friend, but he also knows that Tony's actions could have devastating consequences. He's caught between personal loyalty and his sense of duty, and this internal conflict is one of the film's more nuanced elements. Cheadle's portrayal of Rhodey is grounded and steady, providing a sense of stability in contrast to Tony's chaotic energy. It's easy to see why Rhodey feels torn between his personal bond with Tony and his growing concern for the greater good. In a way, Rhodey's decision to take on the War Machine suit is a form of protection, not just for Tony, but for the world. The War Machine armor represents a response to Tony's refusal to see the consequences of his actions, a way for Rhodey to impose some order on the chaos Tony has created. Cheadle brings both strength and vulnerability to Rhodey, capturing the internal battle between friend and soldier. Pepper Potts, played by Gwyneth Paltrow, has an equally important role in the story. She's Tony's moral anchor, the person who grounds him and keeps him tethered to reality. As Tony's personal assistant and eventual CEO of Stark Industries, Pepper is more than just a love interest. She's his voice of reason, the person who sees through his sarcasm and bravado to the man underneath. As the stakes rise, she becomes a more central figure in Tony's life, helping him navigate the external pressures while also calling him out on his flaws. Paltrow's portrayal of Pepper shows her as strong, capable, and smart. She doesn't let Tony walk all over her, but she also understands him in ways no one else does. There's a tenderness to their relationship, and Paltrow allows Pepper to show frustration with Tony's behavior while also demonstrating deep loyalty. Pepper doesn't want to be involved in the mess of Tony's life, but she is, and she does it with a level of grace that makes her character feel like a true partner rather than just a sidekick. Then there's Black Widow, or Natasha Romanoff, played by Scarlett Johansson. Her introduction in Iron Man 2 is subtle but impactful. At first, she appears to be just another SLD agent, working under Nick Fury's orders, but it becomes clear that she's much more than that. Natasha is a skilled spy, a fighter, and someone who can hold her own in a world full of larger-than-life characters. Johansson plays Natasha with a quiet strength, blending mystery with charisma. She's both an ally and a potential threat to Tony. There's an air of secrecy around her character, and her true motivations aren't revealed until later films in the MCU. While she's not as deeply explored in this movie as some of the others, Black Widow's presence adds another layer to the film. She's tough, capable, and plays a pivotal role in the final battle. Her contribution to the movie is clear, even though she's more of a supporting player in this installment. Finally, there's Nick Fury, played by Samuel L. Jackson, who is perhaps the most important figure in the larger context of the MCU. He's the mastermind behind the Avengers Initiative, and his role in Iron Man 2 is to nudge Tony into a larger world. Fury's relationship with Tony is more tactical than personal. He understands Tony's flaws, but he also sees his potential. While Tony is dealing with his own crises, Fury is focused on the bigger picture, the formation of a team that will eventually face much greater threats. Jackson plays Fury with his usual cool confidence, and his presence adds a sense of gravity to the film. In the end, Iron Man 2 isn't just about Tony Stark learning to work with others. It's about him realizing that he can't do it all alone. The relationships around him, whether with Pepper, Rhodey, or Natasha, are crucial to his growth. It's a film about legacy, responsibility, and the importance of connection. Each character, whether hero or villain, contributes to Tony's journey in a meaningful way. And as the film closes, with Tony still standing at the edge of his personal turmoil, it's clear that his journey has only just begun. Making Iron Man 2 wasn't just about following up on a successful first movie, it was about building a foundation for something much larger. As the second film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Iron Man 2 played a key role in setting the stage for what would become the Avengers franchise. But behind the scenes, there was more at play than just action-packed sequences and polished performances. From unexpected challenges to creative risks, there were plenty of behind-the-scenes moments that defined how the film came to life. For starters, the biggest challenge was not only maintaining the quality of the first movie but also expanding the world of Tony Stark and the Marvel Universe in a way that felt natural. The first Iron Man was a surprise hit, but by the time Iron Man 2 was in the works, Marvel was looking to create a larger shared universe, a universe that would soon explode with the Avengers. The pressure to balance this growing narrative with a compelling standalone story was enormous. Jon Favreau, the director, had to juggle both the expectations for a direct sequel and the need to introduce new elements for the larger MCU. This included introducing Black Widow, hinting at the upcoming Thor movie with the brief appearance of Thor's hammer, and the inclusion of Nick Fury and the Avengers Initiative. But the challenge didn't just stop there. The film had a much tighter timeline than expected. While Iron Man had the luxury of a full production schedule, Iron Man 2 had to be rushed to meet its May 2010 release. This time crunch created some challenges, especially when it came to integrating all the new elements and characters. Scarlett Johansson, who played Black Widow, was added to the movie quite late in the process, and much of her fight choreography had to be carefully designed and executed quickly. The team worked tirelessly to ensure that her character, though introduced late in the game, would feel integral to the story, rather than a rushed addition. Behind the camera, Favreau knew the importance of keeping the tone consistent with the first movie while still expanding the world Tony Stark inhabited. The first Iron Man was known for its perfect balance of humor, action, and emotional depth. The sequel had to build on that foundation without letting the growing scale overwhelm the personal story of Tony Stark. Favreau worked closely with Robert Downey Jr. to maintain the character's wit and charm while also allowing him to explore the darker side of Tony's journey, particularly his struggle with his health and his legacy. Downey, who was already a major part of the character's success, was instrumental in ensuring that Tony remained grounded even as the movie delved deeper into superhero territory. One of the most fascinating aspects of Iron Man 2 is the way it integrated its larger MCU connections without overshadowing the story. The decision to include Nick Fury and the Avengers Initiative came with its own set of challenges. Samuel L. Jackson, who portrayed Fury, was already locked in for future films, but his character's inclusion in Iron Man 2 had to be done in a way that didn't feel like a setup for another movie. His role had to feel natural and integral to the story. The scene where he confronts Tony about the dangers of his technology and the importance of the Avengers Initiative was written in such a way that it both served the current film and planted the seed for the greater MCU. This was a tricky balance, but Favreau and the team managed to pull it off, making it one of the more seamless transitions in the franchise. The character of Whiplash, played by Mickey Rourke, posed another challenge. The original character of Whiplash in the comics is a much more traditional villain, but the film's creative team wanted to make sure that Ivan Vanko felt like a more nuanced antagonist, someone with a personal vendetta rather than a typical bad guy. The filmmakers took inspiration from the character's backstory in the comics, but they decided to make some significant changes, especially in his motivation. Vanko's connection to Tony Stark's father, Howard Stark, was a key plot point, and the team made sure to explore the emotional complexity of the character. This wasn't just a battle between hero and villain, it was a battle between two men who were shaped by the same legacy, but who took different paths. Mickey Rourke's casting was part of the film's attempt to take risks with its casting choices. Rourke had already been through a career resurgence after his success in The Wrestler, and his approach to the character of Vanko was very different from what fans might have expected. He brought a raw intensity to the role, making the character much more tragic than villainous. Rourke was also known for being quite hands-on in his performances, often making his own choices when it came to the character's look and feel. For example, his now iconic tattoos and the way he spoke in the film were his own creative decisions. This type of involvement from an actor isn't always common, but in Rourke's case, it helped make Vanko feel like a fully realized, three-dimensional character rather than just a bad guy in a suit. Rhodey from Terrence Howard. And while this was a significant change, it didn't feel jarring. Cheadle brought his own version of Rhodey to the screen, strong, level-headed, and willing to take extreme measures when necessary. The War Machine armor itself was an exciting moment for fans, and it marked the first time we saw a character wield a suit of armor that was just as powerful as Iron Man's. The special effects team had to carefully design the War Machine suit to be a perfect counterpart to Iron Man's, ensuring that the two armors felt like they belonged to the same world but still had their own distinct identities. The metallic finish, the large weapons attached to the suit, and the overall bulkiness made War Machine stand out in a way that was both visually striking and functionally unique. For fans of the comics, Iron Man 2 was packed with Easter eggs and nods to the source material. One of the more subtle moments came when Tony Stark, in his lab, briefly mentions his father's work on the arc reactor. This wasn't just a throwaway line, it was a deliberate reference to a storyline from the comics, where Tony's father played a significant role in the creation of the original arc reactor. There's also the moment when Stark's private jet flies through the skies, and for a split second, the outline of Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, can be seen in the distance. This wasn't just a random detail, it was a clue to the next big Marvel character. Fans who were paying attention would immediately recognize that this was a lead-in to the Thor movie, which would be released just a year later. The filmmakers were carefully building the larger MCU, and every detail, no matter how small, had significance. The film's score, composed by John Debney, also played a crucial role in setting the tone. The music of Iron Man 2 had to walk a fine line between keeping the rock and roll edge that made the first movie so memorable and also ramping up the epic scale of the MCU. Debney's score blended classic orchestral music with moments of high-octane rock music, creating a soundtrack that felt both modern and timeless. It wasn't just background music. It underscored the emotional beats of the film, amplifying Tony Stark's internal struggles and the larger conflict at play. In the end, Iron Man 2 was a film that couldn't afford to simply rest on the laurels of its predecessor. Every decision, from casting and character development to special effects and Easter eggs, was made with the larger MCU in mind. The movie had to satisfy both longtime fans and casual moviegoers, all while laying the groundwork for a universe that would soon dominate the silver screen. And while it wasn't without its challenges, Iron Man 2 succeeded in doing what it set out to do: expand the world of Tony Stark while simultaneously opening the door to something even bigger. From the opening moments of Iron Man 2, it's clear that the stakes are higher than ever. The world knows Tony Stark is Iron Man, and with that revelation comes a new set of challenges that are as much internal as they are external. The movie is filled with moments that don't just serve as action-packed set pieces but also carry emotional weight and thematic depth that resonate with the audience. These pivotal moments shape the characters, the plot, and, ultimately, the larger narrative of the MCU. One of the earliest key moments comes when Tony Stark, after his announcement to the world in the first film, faces the government's demand to give up the Iron Man suit. It's a critical juncture in the plot because it sets the tone for the movie's central conflict: the battle between personal freedom and collective responsibility. Tony's refusal to comply with the government's wishes is not just an act of defiance but a sign of his deep-rooted belief in autonomy. He sees the suit as an extension of himself, a tool that allows him to control his destiny. But it's more than that. It's a symbol of his struggle to be both a hero and a man who controls his own life. The moment in the Senate hearing, where Senator Stern demands Tony's technology, is a pivotal moment for Tony's character. It forces him to reflect on the consequences of his invention and his role as a public figure. The underlying theme of power and its consequences is clear. Tony's pride in his invention is tested, and his reluctance to give up control is not just a personal issue. It's one that carries massive implications for the world. Tony's emotional journey in this film is deeply tied to his relationship with his own mortality. This is best seen in his interactions with the arc reactor in his chest, which is poisoning him. As he frantically tries to find a solution to his health problems, there's an underlying sense of desperation in his actions. The arc reactor, which was once a symbol of his genius and survival, is now the very thing that could destroy him. This gives rise to the film's most tragic and significant theme: legacy. Tony Stark has always been a man driven by the need to prove his worth, but now, he's forced to confront the reality that his creations could be his undoing. There's a deeper layer of personal reckoning here. As Tony grapples with the idea of his own legacy, what will he leave behind? In many ways, his refusal to admit weakness is a reflection of his deep-seated fear of being forgotten or, worse, remembered only for the destruction his inventions have caused. The arc reactor, as a source of life and death, becomes the physical manifestation of his internal conflict. A pivotal moment in the film comes when Tony has an emotional breakdown at his birthday party. Surrounded by decadence, he's alone in his suffering. It's a raw, vulnerable moment that cuts through the facade of Tony Stark's larger-than-life persona. What's striking about this scene is how it reveals Tony's isolation despite his wealth, his fame, and his genius. He's surrounded by people, yet the reality is that Tony is disconnected from everyone, even those who care about him most. The chaotic party scene is not just a visual representation of his self-destructive tendencies, it's also an emotional depiction of the loneliness that drives him. In many ways, Tony's inability to face his fear of mortality and his own shortcomings leads him to push people away, further deepening his isolation. The breakdown at the party, while funny on the surface, is a heartbreaking moment for the character. It lays bare his insecurities and foreshadows the emotional journey he must take to reconcile his past actions with his present reality. Tony's relationship with his father's legacy is also a key emotional thread that runs throughout the film. His discovery of his father's notes and the revelation of the new element that could potentially save his life is a turning point. This moment is crucial because it forces Tony to reckon with the person his father was, and what kind of person he wants to become. Howard Stark, who had always been a distant figure to Tony, is revealed to have been not just a brilliant inventor but a man with a vision for the future. The emotional weight of this revelation hits Tony hard because it forces him to come to terms with the idea that his father's legacy isn't just about the wealth or the technology, it's about something much deeper. Howard's notes become a metaphor for Tony's own struggle with what it means to be remembered. In many ways, Tony has been running from his father's shadow for most of his life, but when he finally understands the full scope of Howard's work, he starts to come to terms with who he is and who he could be. It's a moment of growth for Tony, one that shifts him from being a man defined by his ego and fear of failure to someone who is ready to embrace responsibility, not just for his inventions, but for his role in the world. The confrontation between Tony and Ivan Vanko, or Whiplash, is another key moment that highlights the emotional and thematic depth of the film. Vanko, who holds a personal vendetta against Tony's family, represents the darker side of legacy. Unlike Tony, who inherited his wealth and genius, Vanko had to fight his entire life for recognition and respect. His desire for revenge is deeply tied to his own feelings of being overlooked, and it contrasts sharply with Tony's journey. While Tony is grappling with the burden of his legacy, Vanko is driven by a desire to destroy it. The final battle between the two, while intense and action-packed, is a battle over something far deeper than just revenge. It's about the choices that shape us and the legacies we leave behind. Vanko sees Tony as a symbol of everything he hates, someone who took the easy path and reaped the rewards, while he was left to rot in obscurity. In contrast, Tony sees Vanko as a reminder of everything he fears, that his own creations could be used for destruction, and that his genius could be overshadowed by a darker, more vengeful legacy. Perhaps the most important emotional moment in the film comes at the end, when Tony realizes that he can't fight his battles alone. Throughout the movie, Tony is isolated, pushing away everyone who cares about him. But by the final confrontation, he understands that his strength doesn't come from his suit or his genius, it comes from his connections to others. This realization is reflected in his decision to embrace the role of a leader, both for himself and for the people around him. The final scenes, where Tony's friendship with Rhodey is solidified and where he finally admits his vulnerabilities, mark a turning point for the character. For the first time in the film, Tony is not just Iron Man. He is also a man who understands the value of community and connection. This moment of growth, while subtle, carries the most weight emotionally. Tony has spent the entire film running from his fears, from the consequences of his actions, and from his own mortality. But in the final moments, he takes responsibility, not just for his inventions, but for his role in a larger world. One of the most significant contributions to the film's emotional impact is the way these moments are complemented by the performances. Robert Downey Jr. anchors the film with a performance that is both charming and heartbreaking. His portrayal of Tony Stark is filled with contradictions, self-confident yet deeply insecure, quick-witted yet emotionally fragile. It's his ability to navigate these contrasts that gives the film its emotional depth. The other performances, particularly from Gwyneth Paltrow as Pepper and Don Cheadle as Rhodey, add to the emotional resonance. Pepper's strength and compassion contrast sharply with Tony's arrogance, and Rhodey's loyalty highlights the central theme of personal responsibility. The moments in Iron Man 2 that stand out are not just about spectacle, they are about what Tony Stark learns along the way. They explore the themes of legacy, responsibility, and connection in ways that transcend the superhero genre. The film succeeds because, despite all the explosions, high-tech suits, and epic battles, it is a deeply personal story about a man who is trying to figure out who he is and what kind of legacy he wants to leave. The emotional and thematic elements of the movie, Tony's struggle with his mortality, his relationship with his father's legacy, and his eventual acceptance of the need for connection, are what make Iron Man 2 not just another superhero film, but a story about growth, redemption, and the power of human relationships. Iron Man 2 stands as a brilliant example of how technical filmmaking can elevate a story from good to unforgettable. Behind the dazzling visuals, action sequences, and iconic moments lies a wealth of creative choices and technical craftsmanship that shape the film's distinct tone. From the cinematography to the sound design, each department contributed something unique to make the film not just an action blockbuster, but a nuanced cinematic experience that continues to resonate with audiences today. Cinematography in Iron Man 2 plays a crucial role in balancing the film's larger-than-life action with intimate character moments. The film's director of photography, Matthew Libatique, known for his work on films like Requiem for a Dream and Black Swan, brought a particular flair to the way the story was captured. Libatique's work with lighting and framing created a sense of intimacy even amidst the grandiose spectacle of the Iron Man suit and the towering sets. One of the standout aspects of his cinematography is how it alternates between grand, sweeping shots during the action sequences and tight, focus close-ups during emotional moments. This choice allows the audience to feel the weight of Tony Stark's inner turmoil while still experiencing the excitement of his external battles. One particularly notable sequence where Liberty's work shines is the film's opening, when Tony Stark makes his first appearance in the Iron Man suit during the Monaco Grand Prix. The tight, claustrophobic nature of the racetrack creates a sense of tension and chaos that mirrors Tony's internal struggle. The use of close-up shots of Tony's face inside the suit, combined with wide, almost chaotic shots of the track, gives the audience a sense of Tony's desperation and how he's being pushed to his limits. The action doesn't feel distant or cold. It's immediately personal, as if we are right there with him, struggling in the heat of the moment. Liberty's approach to lighting, using sharp contrasts and deep shadows, also plays into this sense of personal conflict, reinforcing the idea that while Tony's life may be filled with technology and external spectacle, it's his internal struggles that are truly at the heart of the film. There's another technical decision in the film that stands out: the seamless integration of practical effects with CGI. The Iron Man suit, one of the most iconic elements of the MCU, had already set the bar high in the first film, but Iron Man 2 had the added challenge of expanding on its design while also maintaining its realism. Visual effects supervisor John Nelson and his team worked meticulously to balance the real-world physics with the weightlessness of the suit. A large portion of the film's technical innovation came from combining CGI with practical effects, where the suit's intricate details were not only designed in a computer but also physically created for use in scenes. This gave the film a more tangible, grounded feel, especially when Robert Downey Jr. was suited up. The suit wasn't just a computer-generated image, it was something real, something that interacted with the environment, and that made Tony Stark's transformation from man to machine all the more compelling. But as impressive as the visual effects were, it was the film's sound design that truly helped bring the entire world to life. The sound team, led by supervising sound editor Richard L. Anderson, went to great lengths to make sure that every auditory detail served the story. The sound of Iron Man's suit powering up became a symbol of his presence. The mechanical whirring, the hydraulics, the clicks of armor locking into place, all of these sounds were carefully chosen to convey both the technological sophistication of the suit and the human frailty of the person inside. The result was a soundscape that felt alive and visceral, pulling the audience into the film's high-stakes moments. In contrast, the moments of silence, like the heavy breathing of Tony Stark inside the suit or the soft hum of the arc reactor, served to highlight the vulnerability of the character, making it all the more poignant when Tony's emotional walls began to crack. Sound wasn't only used to emphasize Tony's internal struggles, it was also a way to enhance the broader scale of the film's action. Take, for example, the final battle between Iron Man and War Machine. The sound in this sequence builds in a way that matches the intensity of the fight. The cacophony of explosions, the rapid-fire sound of weapons being discharged, and the deep, resonating hum of the suits all come together to create a soundscape that mirrors the chaos of the scene. And yet, amidst all the noise, there are subtle moments of quiet, moments when the score swells, or when the sound drops out altogether, allowing the emotional weight of the scene to land. It's a technique that mirrors the ebb and flow of the film itself, where personal and external conflicts are always in dialogue with one another. The sound department also made deliberate choices when it came to music. John Debney, who composed the film's score, understood the task of balancing Tony Stark's rockstar persona with the emotional depth the film needed. While the first Iron Man film made heavy use of classic rock music, songs like Black Sabbath's Iron Man became synonymous with the character. Iron Man 2 was tasked with deepening the emotional resonance while still capturing Tony's larger-than-life personality. The result was a score that mixed the bombastic with the intimate. Debney used brass and strings to evoke the heroism of Iron Man while keeping the core of the score rooted in something more grounded. The film's main theme, a mix of orchestral sweeps with electric guitar elements, mirrors the dual nature of Tony Stark himself, part genius inventor, part reckless, unpredictable force. The music was not only a reflection of Tony's character, but also a tool for character development. A perfect example of this is in the scene where Tony is dealing with his health issues and is in his lab, struggling to find a cure for the poisoning caused by the arc reactor. As he sifts through his father's notes, the music takes on a more somber, reflective tone. The shift in the score here signals Tony's emotional transition from someone who's obsessed with controlling the present to someone who is forced to confront his past in order to find a way forward. The transition from the loud, rock-driven moments to the more subtle, emotional cues in the score helps underscore the theme of growth and responsibility. Speaking of themes, the film's use of color also played a significant role in visually supporting the narrative. Art director Tony Fanning, along with the production design team, worked carefully to craft a visual language that reflected the evolving nature of the characters. In earlier scenes, particularly those that feature Tony alone. The color palette is dominated by stark, cold blues and grays, reflecting Tony's isolation and emotional distance. However, as the story progresses, and as Tony starts to open up to those around him, the colors in the environment begin to warm up. This is most notably seen in the scenes with pepper pots, where the setting transitions into warmer tones, signifying the growing emotional connection between the two. The juxtaposition of coldness and warmth isn't just a stylistic choice, it's a visual representation of Tony's internal conflict, his fight to reconcile his personal demons with his need for connection. One particularly creative technical choice that stands out in the film is the way it portrays the stark contrast between Tony's personality and his suit. In many superhero films, the hero is defined by their suit, it's an extension of their identity. In Iron Man 2, however, the suit becomes a symbol of Tony's struggle, as it no longer simply represents power and protection. It's tied to his fear of mortality, and the constant tinkering with its design becomes an act of denial. The scenes where Tony works in his lab, surrounded by pieces of his suit and machines, feel chaotic, with the camera often lingering on his hands as he desperately tries to fix something that can't be fixed. The suit, in this case, is less about heroism and more about Tony's need to control what's slipping away from him. The tension between his genius and his vulnerability is amplified through these visual motifs, making the suit a central figure in his personal story. Equally fascinating is the use of practical effects in the film. While CGI was employed for many of the heavy action scenes, the filmmakers took great care to ensure that certain moments maintained a sense of realism. The suit itself, when worn by Robert Downey Jr., was often a mix of physical props and CGI. The practical suit components, especially in the scenes where Tony gets suited up, were intricately designed, and Downey spent hours learning to move in them. This hands-on approach to creating the suit added a layer of authenticity to Tony Stark's transformation, grounding the film in a tangible sense of physicality. There's a certain weight to the armor when it's seen in full frame, as though it's a real extension of Stark rather than just a product of visual effects. Through all of these technical choices, Iron Man 2 isn't just a spectacle, it's a finely crafted piece of cinema. Every element, from the cinematography to the sound, from the score to the visual design, works in harmony to create a film that tells a deeply personal story while still delivering the action and excitement expected of a blockbuster. The seamless integration of technology with humanity, of external conflict with internal struggle, is what ultimately makes the film not just visually engaging, but emotionally compelling as well. The creative decisions made behind the scenes brought a complex, layered story to life in ways that audiences continue to admire long after the film's release. At its surface, Iron Man 2 is a thrilling superhero film packed with intense action, high-tech gadgets, and explosive battles. However, beneath the bright, flashy exterior lies a story deeply rooted in complex themes and symbolism, making it more than just another installment in the MCU. The film delves into questions of legacy, power, mortality, and responsibility, all of which are intricately woven into the narrative. These underlying layers give the movie a richness that resonates with viewers on a deeper level, inviting them to reflect on the characters and their journey long after the credits roll. At the heart of Iron Man 2 is Tony Stark's internal battle with his own identity and legacy. In the first Iron Man film, Tony's arc was one of personal redemption. He moved from being a self-absorbed, arrogant weapons manufacturer to a man who understood the consequences of his actions and embraced the responsibility that came with his invention of the Iron Man suit. But in Iron Man 2, that journey evolves into a more complex exploration of legacy and the question of what kind of man Tony truly wants to be. As Tony grapples with the knowledge that the arc reactor keeping him alive is also poisoning him, the film begins to explore the fragility of life and the inevitable truth of mortality. This confrontation with death forces Tony to reflect on his legacy. What will he leave behind? The question gnaws at him throughout the film, as is faced with the reality that his genius, while a gift, may also be a curse. The idea of legacy is reflected not just in Tony's relationship with his father, but also in his struggle with the responsibility that comes with his invention. Howard Stark, who remains a shadowy figure throughout the film, represents a complicated legacy, a legacy built on intelligence, ambition, and vision. Yet Tony's relationship with his father has always been distant, clouded by unresolved issues and a lack of emotional connection. It's only when Tony uncovers Howard's notes and realizes the true scope of his father's vision that he begins to understand the deeper meaning of his legacy. The new element that Howard developed, hidden in the notes, becomes a symbol of that legacy, a link between the past and the future. It's an attempt to correct the wrongs of the past, to offer Tony a chance to rebuild not just his health, but his understanding of what is meant to do with his brilliance. The theme of legacy is also explored through Ivan Vanko, the film's antagonist, whose personal vendetta against Tony is rooted in his own bitter relationship with his father. Unlike Tony, who inherited his fortune and intellect, Vanko grew up in the shadows of his father's failure, which ultimately fuels his desire for revenge. The conflict between Tony and Vanko mirrors the tension between two opposing notions of legacy, one built on privilege, and the other on resentment and neglect. While Tony is struggling to figure out what his legacy will be, Vanko's obsession with destroying Tony's legacy reveals how unchecked bitterness can consume someone, turning them into the very thing they despise. Their final confrontation isn't just a physical battle, it's a clash of ideologies, each representing a different understanding of what it means to inherit something from the past and carry it forward. Symbolism in Iron Man 2 plays a significant role in conveying these deeper themes, and much of it revolves around the contrast between life and death, creation and destruction. One of the most prominent symbols in the film is the arc reactor. Originally introduced in the first film as a life-saving device for Tony, the arc reactor evolves in Iron Man 2 into something much darker. As Tony's health deteriorates, the reactor, once a symbol of hope and innovation, becomes a symbol of his mortality and his failure to escape the consequences of his past actions. The fact that the arc reactor is poisoning him serves as a metaphor for the duality of his genius. While it has saved him, it's also destroying him. In this way, the arc reactor represents the central conflict in Tony's life. His brilliance, while a source of immense power, also comes with a price. It's a visual representation of the toll that ambition and unchecked genius can take on a person, forcing Tony to confront the limits of his own creations. Another symbol tied to the film is the Iron Man suit itself, which represents both freedom and entrapment. On one hand, the suit gives Tony the ability to control his world, to fly above the chaos and the struggles of everyday life. It is his escape, his armor against vulnerability. But as the film progresses, it becomes clear that the suit is also a trap. Tony's reliance on the suit grows to the point where it begins to define him, not just as Iron Man, but as Tony Stark himself. The suit, in this sense, is both a liberation and a prison. It represents Tony's desire to control his life, to wield power in a way that others cannot. But it also represents his fear of confronting the parts of himself that are vulnerable, human, and ultimately mortal. His dependence on the suit becomes a metaphor for his refusal to accept his limitations, both as a man and as a hero. This duality of freedom and confinement is also explored through Tony's relationships with others, particularly Pepper Potts and James Rhodey Rhodes. Tony's interaction with Pepper is a constant push and pull between his need for independence and his desire for connection. While he pushes her away, unable to admit his vulnerability, Pepper represents the part of Tony that longs for emotional intimacy and personal growth. She is the grounding force in his life, the one person who constantly challenges him to be more than just the man behind the suit. Similarly, Rhodey, who steps into the War Machine armor, embodies a different kind of responsibility. Where Tony is reckless and driven by ego, Rhodey is steady and driven by a sense of duty. Their friendship is tested throughout the film, as Rhodey ultimately decides to take the suit for himself to stop Tony's reckless behavior. This marks a turning point for Tony, forcing him to realize that the people in his life aren't just there to support him, they are there to hold him accountable. The choice to have Rhodey wear the suit also symbolizes the idea that Tony cannot face the world alone. He needs the strength and support of others to overcome his personal flaws. The film's use of color also plays into its deeper thematic exploration. Early in the movie, the color palette is dominated by cold, metallic tones, grays, silvers, and blues that reflect Tony's emotional distance and his struggle with his own mortality. The Iron Man suit, while undeniably powerful and sleek, is bathed in these cold colors, emphasizing its role as both a tool for survival and a reminder of Tony's inability to fully confront his inner fears. As Tony's journey progresses, and as he begins to reconcile with his legacy and his fears, the colors in the film begin to warm up. In the final act, when Tony embraces the support of those around him and takes responsibility for his actions, the warm oranges and reds that permeate the visuals reflect his newfound understanding of the importance of connection and responsibility. The contrast between cold and warm tones also parallels the larger narrative of Iron Man 2. At its core, the film is about Tony's transition from a man who seeks to control his fate through isolation and power, to someone who realizes that true strength comes from embracing vulnerability and accepting the help of others. The suit, the arc reactor, the battles, and even the characters themselves all reflect different facets of Tony's struggle between embracing his humanity and relying too heavily on his genius. These contrasting elements, life and death, power and weakness, isolation and connection, are what give the film its emotional depth, turning it into more than just another action-packed superhero tale. The deeper layers of Iron Man 2 enrich the narrative by grounding its larger-than-life spectacle in very human struggles. Tony Stark's journey is one of self-discovery, but it's also a universal story about the tension between ambition and humility, freedom and responsibility, creation and destruction. The symbolism of the arc reactor, the Iron Man suit, and Tony's relationships with those around him all serve to illuminate these themes, turning the film into something far more meaningful than a simple comic book adaptation. It's a story of a man learning to accept his imperfections, to confront his fears, and to realize that true heroism doesn't come from power, but from the willingness to embrace the humanity that makes us all fallible and, ultimately, stronger. The journey that brought Iron Man 2 to life is one that blends passion, collaboration, and a shared commitment to storytelling. While the film's action, visual effects, and design elements all play their parts in crafting its cinematic experience, it's the chemistry between the cast, the insights of the crew, and the reactions from both audiences and critics that truly shaped its legacy. Behind the glossy suits and high-tech battles, the soul of the film was born from the people involved, on-screen and off. At the heart of the film is Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark, a role that not only defined a character but helped redefine a genre. Downey's portrayal of the brilliant, yet flawed, billionaire genius was one of the key elements that set the Iron Man franchise apart from other superhero films. From the very first film, it was clear that Downey had found a way to make Tony Stark both larger-than-life and completely relatable. In Iron Man 2, this duality was pushed even further, as Tony was forced to confront both his own mortality and his complicated legacy. Downey's chemistry with his co-stars only elevated this dynamic, making each interaction feel more grounded, more emotionally complex. The relationship between Tony Stark and Pepper Potts, played by Gwyneth Paltrow, serves as one of the film's emotional anchors. There's an effortless camaraderie between Downey and Paltrow that allows their characters to both challenge and support each other. In interviews, both actors have mentioned how their friendship off-screen helped inform the depth of their on-screen connection. For Downey, it was about creating a sense of balance, a balance between Tony's witty, often reckless behavior, and the grounded, level-headed nature of Pepper. Paltrow, on the other hand, had always seen Pepper as Tony's moral compass, and the tension between their characters, built on mutual respect and hidden affection, made for some of the most engaging moments of the film. The chemistry between the two made their partnership feel less like a traditional romantic subplot and more like a complex, evolving relationship between two equals. The subtlety in their interactions was a testament to their trust in each other as performers. However, it wasn't just the core duo that brought Iron Man 2 to life. Don Cheadle, who replaced Terrence Howard as James Rhodey Rhodes, entered the role with a quiet confidence, seamlessly integrating into the existing dynamic while giving the character his own distinct voice. Cheadle brought a grounded, almost fatherly energy to Rhodey that contrasted well with Downey's manic energy. Their shared scenes, especially the moments where Rhodey confronts Tony about his reckless behavior, provided some of the film's most emotionally charged sequences. What's fascinating is how Cheadle, despite being relatively new to the role, was able to immediately step into the character's shoes without feeling like he was replacing Howard's version of Rhodes. Cheadle's interpretation was his own, and yet it felt like a natural extension of what had come before. Mickey Rourke, who portrayed the antagonist Ivan Vanko, was another standout in the film, though his presence was more complex. Rourke's portrayal of Vanko, a brilliant yet bitter man seeking revenge on Tony Stark for perceived wrongs, was striking in its subtlety. The character was a far cry from the typical over-the-top villain often seen in blockbuster films, and Rourke's restraint in playing Vanko made him all the more unsettling. Interviews with Rourke reveal that he was drawn to the role because of the character's emotional depth and the potential to create a villain who wasn't just evil for the sake of it. Instead, Vanko's bitterness was rooted in the trauma of his past and his struggle to make a name for himself in the shadow of his father's failures. Rourke's approach added a layer of humanity to the character, turning what could have been a typical antagonist into someone whose motivations were deeply personal, even tragic. This complexity gave the film's central conflict, between Tony and Vanko, a sense of weight that would have been missing if Vanko had been just another one-dimensional villain. In addition to the core cast, Iron Man 2 benefited from the performance of Scarlett Johansson, who made her debut as Natasha Romanoff, later known as Black Widow. Johansson's role in the film was initially shrouded in secrecy, adding an element of intrigue. When her character revealed herself to be an undercover agent for SLD, the audience was not only introduced to a key figure in the MCU but also shown a different kind of strength. Johansson's portrayal was both fierce and subtle, with a physicality that belied Romanoff's true depth as a character. In interviews, Johansson has shared how she worked with the stunt coordinators to craft some of her action sequences, ensuring that Romanoff's movements were both graceful and lethal. This attention to detail paid off in her fight scenes, where Romanoff displayed both physical and emotional complexity, making her an immediate fan favorite. While the cast was essential to the film's success, the crew behind the scenes played just as significant a role in shaping Iron Man 2. Director Jon Favreau returned to helm the sequel, bringing his unique vision and understanding of the character to the table. Favreau, who had played Tony Stark's bodyguard Happy Hogan in the first film, knew that Iron Man 2 had to build upon the foundation laid by the original while expanding the universe in meaningful ways. Favreau's approach to the film was deeply collaborative, and his relationship with the cast was one of trust and respect. In interviews, Favreau has spoken about how he encouraged the actors to improvise and bring their own ideas to the table. This allowed the actors to feel more invested in their characters and gave the film a sense of authenticity, even in its most fantastical moments. One of the most significant challenges that Favreau and the crew faced during production was managing the balance between character development and spectacle. With the success of the first Iron Man film, expectations for the sequel were high, and the pressure to deliver larger-than-life action sequences was palpable. However, Favreau remained focused on telling a personal story about Tony Stark's internal struggle. This was evident in the film's pacing, where quieter, more reflective moments were given equal weight to the explosive set pieces. Favreau's ability to balance these elements helped keep the film grounded, ensuring that even the most intense action scenes served the emotional arcs of the characters. As the film neared its release, anticipation grew among fans who had been eagerly awaiting the continuation of Tony Stark's journey. When Iron Man 2 finally hit theaters in May 2010, the reception was mixed, but largely positive. Audiences were thrilled by the action, the visual effects, and, of course, the return of Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark. The film's ability to deliver a satisfying superhero spectacle while also exploring Tony's personal growth made it a hit with fans who had grown attached to the character. The inclusion of new characters like Black Widow and the expansion of the MCU were also well received, adding an extra layer of excitement for viewers who were eager to see the broader universe begin to take shape. However, critical reception was more divided. While many praised the film for its performances, particularly Downey Jr.'s continued excellence as Tony Stark, some felt that the film struggled with pacing and character development. Critics noted that, compared to the first Iron Man, the sequel felt a bit more like a setup for future MCU films, with some of its emotional depth being overshadowed by the larger narrative threads being introduced. Despite these critiques, Iron Man 2 was still considered a success, both commercially and in terms of its contribution to the broader Marvel Cinematic Universe. Over time, however, Iron Man 2 has found its place as an integral part of the MCU. Its impact is perhaps best seen in how it deepened the complexity of Tony Stark's character and set the stage for the larger narrative arcs that would unfold in subsequent films. While it may not have received the same level of critical acclaim as the first Iron Man, it undeniably played a crucial role in shaping the world of the Avengers and establishing the character dynamics that will be pivotal to the success of the MCU in the years to come. In the years since its release, the film has garnered a dedicated following, with many fans appreciating its quieter, more introspective moments, as well as its introduction of iconic characters like Black Widow. Interviews with the cast and crew continue to highlight how deeply invested they were in bringing the film to life, and how much of the on-screen chemistry came from genuine friendships and collaborative effort behind the scenes. It's clear that Iron Man 2 was not just another sequel, but a film that required the combined talents of a diverse team of artists, actors, and technicians who all worked together to create something greater than the sum of its parts. Looking back, Iron Man the 2nd of May not have had the same immediate critical acclaim as other entries in the MCU, but its place in the franchise's larger narrative is undeniable. It serves as both a pivotal chapter in Tony Stark's personal journey and a crucial stepping stone in the evolution of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The cast's dynamic, the crew's vision, and the audience's reactions all came together to form a film that remains a key piece of the MCU puzzle. Iron Man 2 stands as a film that, in many ways, marks a crucial turning point not only for the Marvel Cinematic Universe but for the superhero genre itself. Though not as universally hailed as its predecessor, the sequel left an indelible mark on both pop culture and cinema. It laid the groundwork for what would become the Marvel phenomenon and helped shape the future of blockbuster filmmaking. More than just a superhero film, Iron Man 2 resonated deeply with audiences, echoing broader themes of legacy, personal growth, and the weight of responsibility. Its influence stretches far beyond the screen, seeping into the way Hollywood approaches sequels, character development, and even the notion of cinematic universes. When Iron Man 2 was released in 2010, it did so at a moment in time when superhero films were already on the rise, but no one had yet fully grasped how large and interconnected these stories could become. The Marvel Cinematic Universe was still in its infancy, and while the success of Iron Man had laid the foundation, the second film in the series was the true test of Marvel's ability to create a lasting, interconnected narrative. What Iron Man 2 achieved was monumental, not just in terms of the film itself, but in how it impacted the larger MCU. The film began weaving together threads that would later be fully realized in films like The Avengers, introducing characters like Black Widow and further expanding the world of SALD. Through subtle references, cameos, and a keen focus on developing Tony Stark's story, it set the stage for the broader universe that would soon captivate global audiences. Beyond the confines of the MCU, Iron Man 2 was significant in how it approached the superhero genre as a whole. It was one of the first films to not just focus on the action or spectacle, but to really lean into the complexities of its lead character. The film's thematic exploration of legacy, identity, and the burden of responsibility was, and still is, groundbreaking in its approach to superhero storytelling. Whereas previous superhero films had largely confined themselves to a hero's origin story and their eventual battle with a villain, Iron Man 2 dug into the consequences of being a hero, asking what happens when the weight of being the world's savior begins to crush the very person wearing the armor. This introspective take on the genre set Iron Man 2 apart, giving it an emotional depth that resonated with audiences who are often used to more superficial portrayals of superheroes. One of the film's greatest cultural impacts was the way it shifted the narrative about the responsibility of both individuals and organizations. Tony Stark was no longer just a superhero. He became a symbol of modern-day conflict, torn between his genius, his ego, and the greater good. As we watched Tony struggle with the implications of his arc reactor and face the growing dangers of his own fame, his story mirrored larger conversations happening in real-world politics, technology, and society. In a world where the lines between good and bad were increasingly blurred, Iron Man 2 raised important questions about who gets to wield power and the moral responsibility that comes with it. This wasn't just a fight between Tony and his foes, it was a fight with himself, an internal conflict that spoke to the ways in which power, wealth, and privilege can both empower and corrupt. The film's treatment of its antagonist, Ivan Vanko, also resonated with broader cultural conversations. Vanko's personal vendetta against Tony Stark mirrored the frustrations of those left behind in a world dominated by the powerful few. His backstory, which involved a sense of being wronged and overlooked, tapped into a sense of societal injustice that felt highly relevant. Vanko wasn't just a man seeking revenge. He was a person who had been marginalized and, in his mind, denied his rightful place in the world. His story became a metaphor for many people who feel disempowered in the face of corporate greed, systemic inequality, and inherited privilege. While some critics felt the villain was somewhat underdeveloped, his inclusion in the film added a layer of commentary about how personal pain and a desire for recognition can sometimes fuel destructive actions. Yet the film's true legacy lies in how it changed the way Hollywood looked at sequels and interconnected narratives. Iron Man 2 wasn't just a follow-up. It was a carefully calculated piece of the puzzle that would eventually lead to the Avengers. Marvel Studios, by this point, had already established a unique strategy to build a shared universe across multiple films, something no studio had done before on such a grand scale. The success of Iron Man 2 demonstrated that there was more to a franchise than just individual films. It was about building a cohesive world where characters, stories, and themes could interweave across multiple narratives, providing a bigger and more exciting picture with each film. In a sense, the MCU has since become the model for many of today's biggest franchises, proving that fans are more invested in a larger, interconnected world than in standalone stories. Iron Man 2 was an early precursor to this storytelling model, helping to set the standard for what modern blockbusters could aspire to. The movie's influence also extended to the casting and character dynamics within the MCU. The chemistry between Robert Downey Jr. and Gwyneth Paltrow, for instance, became the cornerstone for what would be a deeply moving and often understated romantic dynamic between Tony Stark and Pepper Potts. Their evolving relationship was never forced or overly dramatic. Instead, it filmed to maintain its emotional integrity. Cheadle's portrayal of the character is grounded and dependable, providing a counterbalance to Tony's impulsiveness. The rivalry and friendship between the two characters gives Iron Man 2 its emotional stakes. It's more than just about the spectacle. It's about the human connections that drive these characters forward. Mickey Rourke's Ivan Vanko, though not the traditional villain, is memorable in his quiet intensity. Rourke brings a depth to Vanko that makes him a tragic figure, rather than a one-dimensional antagonist. He's driven by a desire for vengeance, but underneath his bitterness is a feeling of abandonment and betrayal. This emotional complexity elevates him beyond just a villain seeking revenge. Vanko is a character who challenges Tony Stark's very existence, an embodiment of the dangers that come with unchecked power. His arc speaks to the importance of understanding one's past and how it shapes the choices we make, whether for good or for ill. And then, of course, there's Black Widow, Natasha Romanoff, who makes her big-screen debut in Iron Man 2. Scarlett Johansson's performance as the mysterious, fierce, and calculating Romanoff immediately captured audiences' attention. She's a character whose introduction feels like more than just a tease for the Avengers. She has her own depth, her own reasons for being there, and her interactions with Tony and Pepper create an intriguing dynamic that hints at greater things to come. Romanoff's inclusion in Iron Man 2 wasn't just a cameo. It was the beginning of a journey that would span multiple films, leading to her becoming one of the most beloved characters in the MCU. The visual spectacle, too, is unforgettable. The action sequences in Iron Man 2 are some of the most exciting in the MCU, but they never overshadow the story or characters. From the explosive opening sequence in Monaco to the thrilling final battle between Iron Man and War Machine, every fight scene is designed to keep the audience on the edge of their seats. But what's impressive is how the filmmakers managed to tie these moments back into Tony's personal journey. The action doesn't just exist for spectacle's sake. It serves the larger narrative of Tony's internal conflict. Even the technology, the suits, and the high-tech gadgets are an extension of the film's themes, of a man at war with himself, using his intelligence to survive but ultimately realizing that no amount of armor can protect him from his own demons. The film's contribution to the larger MCU narrative is significant as well. Iron Man 2 didn't just focus on expanding Tony Stark's story, it also took crucial steps in creating a shared universe. The introduction of LD, the deeper exploration of Nick Fury, and the first hints at the Avengers are woven into the film seamlessly. While the film stands on its own, it also plays a critical role in the larger tapestry that would eventually lead to the formation of the Avengers team. It's a perfect example of how a film can not only be part of a larger story but also manage to stand alone with its unique emotional depth and narrative focus. The legacy of Iron Man 2 is multifaceted. It wasn't just another sequel. It was a cornerstone in the creation of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It demonstrated that superhero films could be more than just about saving the world. They could be about self-discovery, relationships, and personal stakes. Tony Stark's evolution in this film, as a man coming to terms with his own mortality and legacy, would become a driving force throughout the MCU. It set a precedent for future films in the franchise to not just focus on action but on character development, showing that the emotional arcs of the heroes are just as important as their battles. Looking back, it's clear that Iron Man 2 has become a key part of the MCU's foundation. While it may not have received the same level of critical acclaim as some other films in the series, its influence cannot be overstated. It helped lay the groundwork for the interconnected world of the Avengers, introduced beloved characters, and elevated the superhero genre by exploring deeper, more personal themes. Even after all these years, Iron Man 2 still holds up as a rich, multifaceted movie that offers more than just flashy action. It offers a story that's grounded in real human emotions and struggles. Now, if you've made it this far, you're clearly a fan of Iron Man 2 and all the things that make it so special. If you haven't already, hit that like button, drop a comment with your favorite moment from the film, and make sure you subscribe for more in-depth analysis, movie breakdowns, and everything you love about your favorite films. We've only scratched the surface of what makes Iron Man 2 unforgettable, and there's so much more to explore. Thanks for sticking around, and until next time, stay tuned for more.